Hi friends, Max Elage here. In this video, TTT coach Adam Rogers and I introduce DSGN Fitness, our new online training program. In this video, we'll cover who it's for, why we created it, and what our first training cycle is going to look like. So the DSGN Fitness really was a program that started based on what we observed in the design. And the design is our online training program that's built exclusively to train people that want to get better at the sport of CrossFit. They want to go to competitions. They want to be at the open. They want to get better at all of those skills. And it's a very structured and systematic thing that we've continued to try to figure out how to make better. It's brought a lot of value. We've, had multiple training paths, figure out how to deliver those differently, but it's not serving a specific group of people, or it's identifying to us a series of problems that we really wanted to solve with a new style of training program.
Yeah, I mean, there's challenges with any group-based program. You're never going to be able to exactly find a fit for each person that's inside of it. But one of the things that we've noticed over time with the design is there's probably a growing body of people who don't necessarily fit the mold of what you're trying to target with the design, right? This idea of like being a better competitor, right? On game day, going out and having the skills, having the volume resilience necessary, having support systems in place to be able to support athletic development over time. So what DSGN Fitness is basically our solution to those people.
Right? To that problem. And it's like, there's a distinction that I think we need to make. I think anybody that's ever interested in CrossFit has a competitive instinct inside of them. They want to be better. They're into comparison. They're more A-type. But being competitive does not mean that you are a competitor in the sport. Like you don't want to actually be at competitions, measure yourself from year over year in the open, try to qualify for the games. And there's a problem if your end goal is not competing and you're training on a program that's built to make you better at competing. And we've seen a bunch of those problems over time. So I feel like the program that we're trying to create still ties into that competitive culture, that instinct that you have inside of you to want to be a better version of yourself, but it doesn't have some of the drawbacks that we've seen of people that want to be in a competitor-based program, because any athlete has a life cycle. I mean, it's very rare in any sport for somebody to have that identification with their athlete self as their primary thing, like who they are in this world, right? If you talk to Noah, like, who is he? He's a CrossFit athlete. It's how his whole day-to-day structure is. We've probably went through some, maybe not to that degree, but where we identified with our performance in the sport.
Yeah, I think that my physical side of things has always been really, really high line for me. Like it's something that I value really highly. Probably not to the level as Noah, but it's also not to the point where I want to surrender it completely. Right? It's been important to me over a long period of time, and I think it's going to continue to be important to me. So just because I'm not a competitor inside the sport doesn't mean that I don't want to continue to express myself physically or try and improve my fitness over time. It's just that doing it in a way that I'm treating myself as a competitor, I think is doing myself a disservice.
So we see that life cycle. We see it in the design, which is where the program kind of got spawned from with DSGN Fitness, but we also see it with individual clients or just, I've consulted with gym owners all over, and there's a ton that have had to consciously take their programming away from a competitive bias because they've been seeing some of these same type of issues. So I think it's important to understand that there's a way to train that allows you to not have some of those drawbacks, but still get the benefits that we're looking for. We took some notes before the podcast that you have there that I don't remember in my pea brain. So maybe you could just go through some of the things that we've seen, which I think the program that we created is the solution to. It's almost like those are the problems. We created the solution.
So we'll talk generally about the issues now. Later on, we'll actually get into the nitty-gritty of what the first cycle looks like, what we're trying to accomplish, what the goals are, what the theme is,
how it works and stuff.
But first, I think it's important to say, what is it that we're trying to avoid right now? What are some of the common burnout issues that we see in that kind of person who's either run their life cycle and they're at this point right now where they don't need to be a competitor anymore, or they might have other constraints, whether that be gym access, time management, other life priorities that have risen up over time. So some common burnout issues that we wrote down before is probably the first one is too frequent touches on intensity. And one of the things that you said before we hopped on here is this idea of a misconception of intensity as the end all be all for fitness gain. So you can elaborate on that a little bit more, and we can talk about why the touches on intensity in a design fitness program will not look like what you're used to before.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a cultural or an educational differing point between me and CrossFit as an organizational entity, is that constantly varied high intensity functional movements is the way that they would describe it in terms of how to get adaptation. And I don't really think that the high intensity component is necessary for longevity and development. And what you see with people, if they go after hard session after hard session after hard session multiple times a day, is just a decrease in overall energy levels or vigor or like people are just tired, right? Like it's a hard thing to walk around tired on a day-to-day basis because you've been dropping the hammer every single session. And the reality is, if you look at people in training programs of any sport outside of this one, you don't really see a huge distribution of that training being max effort. And if you couple that, one of the reasons why I think there exists a bigger version of this in design is the design is written to a certain caliber of athlete. Sure. So if somebody's down here and they jump into that, and we're trying to solve that program in the design by creating athletic tiers, but it's a conversation for another time. But if somebody is down here and they're jumping into this program, say me and Travis are doing the same training program, the intensity that he's experiencing on his system is not like mine, because he's got better respiratory endurance, better movement quality in the sport, better muscles to be able to do it, better blood volume, and all of those things. So if I am doing that program, I'm basically hitting too much intensity too frequently, and then I don't have the recovery capacity for it, which you see actually can create a very unhealthy profile. Like if you have a performance-based training model for yourself and you don't have the underlying capacity to support it, you can actually make yourself unhealthy.
Sure. I remember a podcast that you guys did with Travis. I think that was about junk volume. Yeah. And like a way that I try and think about junk volume isn't necessarily like looking at a program and thinking, oh, that's way too much. Some of that has to be junk volume. Junk volume to me is training that the athlete can't positively adapt to, right? So for Travis, it's not junk volume if he's getting better over time, if he's still able to recover between sessions and bring quality the next day. Yeah. But for you to do that session, you can't recover from it. You can't bring the intensity and the quality necessary into that session. That's junk volume for you. That's how I think about it. And I think that inside of the design or inside of a competitor-based program, people who don't have the support or the capacity necessarily to be able to adapt positively to that, it turns into junk volume, even though the program is really fucking solid, right? Yeah. So that's the difference between the two, I think, for me, and how I try and think about it a little bit more. But the frequency of intensity, I think, is one thing that could lend itself to being a disservice for a certain demographic of athlete. Yeah,
and if you want to be an athlete, sometimes you got to push the boundary. You got to push the threshold, because you're constantly trying to get better at a certain number of variables. Whereas if you're just trying to be fit and express your competitive nature, you don't really need to meticulously measure every single training variable all the time and push to the threshold. If you're at 90% of your 1 rep max or your respiratory threshold, like it's probably enough to stimulate adaptation. Sure. Because you're not looking for the top 1% of performance that could potentially push you over the edge.
Yeah. Yeah. So another one that we writ down was time management.
Is writ down the past tense?
We wrote down. Written. It was written in the past.
I forgot what you said now. Can you repeat
No, it's
it?
fine. You're just encouraging me to never talk to you on here again. Get me on here and mock me. Time management. I love it.
Time management.
Time management with other lifestyle priorities. So the idea being that you only have a finite amount of time in your day. Some of that can still be used to bring physical training into your day. There's less of that to be able to pull from now. And your ability or your willingness to compromise and try and pull from other areas of your life is just sacrificed in a way, right? Yeah.
So with the design, we've obviously seen that problem. So like we write the program, and up until this point, we had 3 different training paths: strength, engine, CrossFit. And we realized like that's not super helpful. We're trying to educate people on how to grab from different places, and the elites are supposed to do all 3. We're like, you know what? Let's make it elite, RX, masters, and then some developmental group after that, which will be intermediate scale, the combination of the 2. I'm not entirely sure yet, but that kind of solves the time management issue for athletes a little bit. But an RX athlete is not going to get all of their warm-ups, all of their cool downs, all of their strength done in an hour, right? Like you just need more time. You have more skills to get better at. You have to touch each one of those skills, I'd say at least on a weekly frequency. Like if you're not doing muscle ups on a week to week basis, it's really hard to be good at muscle ups under a competitive pressure. So you realize like, okay, well, time management for an athlete is about managing all the outside time so that when you come in, you can spend as much time as you need to get the work done.
Yeah. And you can stay focused while you're here.
Exactly. You're not worried about other stuff.
Yeah.
When you really look at the amount of exercise or training that's required to stay healthy and enjoy what you're doing and keep getting better, it doesn't need to be that. You don't need to be doing 2 hours of all of that other stuff. And if you are, and then you're neurotically managing your time and setting alarms to get up and doing all of this other stuff, it becomes counterproductive to like, who am I as a person? I'm not getting paid if I go and I finish top 200 in the open. No one's going to give a shit. See, like I will, but no one's actually going to care. Sponsors aren't going to be like, oh, you qualified in the Masters division. Good job. So I need to figure out like, well, how do I distribute my time in my day so that all of my priorities are met? And then the training that I do is really supporting that lifestyle. Right. So I think it was important for us to create a program that was more time sensitive, like get in, get out, make it the best hour of your training or the best hour of your day where you're training to feel better. And so you can do all your other shit better and prioritize other things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value into setting aside a time window that's protected for you. Not necessarily to put a negative stigma around it, but to be selfish for a second. Like this is something that I care about. Like if I'm working a 9 to 5 and then I go home to kids or I have to deal with a relationship issue, like you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And it's really easy to build excuses and say like, oh, I just don't have it for today. I can't go in and do that 90 to 120 minute session. I just don't have it. So our goal with fitness was to take some of those things and remove as many obstacles as possible. So on the time management standpoint, it's like, we're going to try and structure your session from start to finish as much as we can so that you can not only look at it from like a snapshot view and picture what everything's going to look like and how much it's going to take out of your day, but it's also going to help keep you accountable while you're inside the session. Stay on point. You should be here at 15 minutes. You should be here at 20 minutes.
Yeah. So we're basically doing the internal time management of the training session for you and also trying to help you with your global time management by making sure that the training session is short enough that you really shouldn't have excuses. I mean, I don't have kids, but I feel like talking to enough people with kids, close enough. It seems like kids are one of the most commonly used excuses for why people cannot take care of their own body's health, mental well-being, which to me really sounds messed up. It's like, well, now I have kids, I shouldn't care about myself at all. And I feel like an hour dedicated to your personal well-being should be more than accomplishable for people. I mean, maybe not every day. Like if your kid gets sick and you got to go do something, I get it.
There's going to be things that come up. Yeah. But it's a hard thing for a new parent to say, I need to be able to set aside 45 to 60 minutes of my day because you feel like you should be there in that parental role, right? Like you're there, like I'm all they have, right? Yeah. But I still think that you can bring more when you're there if you took care of other things that made you feel better in the meantime.
Cool. So time management.
Next. Another one that we talked about before was this misconception that doing what high-level CrossFit athletes do is going to make you look like them, or doing what high-level CrossFit athletes do and being to that level of fitness is going to make you feel better also. I think that that's a really common problem that we see with people who are either just getting into the sport or they're trying to make those next steps. It's like, listen, if I train like Noah, I'm going to be able to look like Noah, to the point where people honestly think he's photoshopped in real life. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But there's lots of potential detrimental things that go along with training that intensely, that often, that can be counterproductive to your body, to your health over time.
I mean, this one is such a deep big Pandora's box to open up.
It's big and deep.
Big and deep. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but it's just not true. So the thing that Noah does that I think makes him an optimal physical specimen relative to his genetics, that I say, okay, if everybody did this, I'm sure they would look their best, is dedicate every single day to fueling their body and doing a lot of physical activity. The downside is the physical activity that Noah chooses is not something that most people could adapt to. So if that was the physical activity they chose and they were literally doing the same thing that he did, they probably would not find optimal body composition, because he's adapting to that work in a very optimal way. Right. Whereas other people are not going to, like, if your movement quality is not the same, you don't have the same respiratory mechanics, you don't have the same underlying sleep habits, you don't have the sponsors paying for your food and your supplements and doing all of those other things, then you actually doing what he's doing is going to make you look worse.
Probably.
Right? Like it's very, very, very rare.
It's a different way to think about junk volume. So earlier we talked about it in terms of like your ability to improve your fitness metrics, right?
Yeah.
Junk volume, if you're not, improving across those and adapting positively, it's probably junk volume. What about if it has negative impact on your hormone levels, on your energy levels? It increases joint pain. Is that now junk volume? I'd make the argument, yes.
Yes. So jumping deeper into the Pandora's box, which is
bigger and deeper.
I'm going, this might not get me a lot of likes, but I don't really care at that point.
I'll always like you.
Thank you. People need to understand that you have a certain subset of genetics when you come out of the womb, and some people look good and other people's look less good. And you have a band of how much potential you have on the aesthetic side of it. And you can make changes to that. And I definitely would encourage everybody to take looking good and feeling good in your skin as a priority in your life. I think it's important to be able to look in the mirror and feel good about what you see. But if you look in the mirror and what you're expecting to see is Noah's body, or, whoever is Chandler's body, or whatever your aesthetic ideal is, Annie Thor's daughter, and you're expecting that your training is going to yield that as what you see in the mirror, you're setting yourself up for a crazy internal headspace. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. So that's a problem from a training perspective, that I don't think people should be doing what the elites do. But it's also a problem that I think it's twofold. It's one is that sponsors are aware of the fact that if somebody with a body like that says, do what I do and you'll look like this, or what I do is why I look like this, that's one problem. And two is somebody believing that. Yeah. Like you believing, if I do that, I'm going to look like that, is a problem.
Most people want to believe it, though. They want to believe that there's a way for them to embody that, right? Yeah. So I think that people do play on that, and is trying to like tap into that emotional, like, hey, you could be better. Look, you could look like this.
Yeah. You can be better, but you probably can't look like that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I think it's an unhealthy and unrealistic. How many of those people that we look up and that we put up on the pedestal, like, Noah's 29 years old and he's paid full time to do this. Like, will that same profile be there when he's 45 and has 3 kids and he's not a full-time trained athlete? I'm sure he'll still look very good but there's just going to be somebody newer and younger and hotter that's going to be the next person that goes up there. So it's like constantly evolving or revolving door of putting that person up there for you to almost convince you, is like, oh, that's what I need to do if I want to look like that.
Yeah. The other way to look at that is, so you were talking about this upper bound and lower bound of possible states that an individual body can lie in.
Yeah.
I might be more inclined to make the argument that for me to get as close as possible to my upper bound, to look as good as I possibly can, it means that my training has to get more in alignment with where I'm at right now, not necessarily trying to exceed it, which I think is the common misconception. Yeah. If I can just train that little bit harder, even though it might be outside of my realm of adaptability, I'll look better as a result. And I don't think that that's the case. I think sometimes bringing training volume down improves your ability to look better, to feel better, to not deal with the joint pains and the hormonal issues that might go along with it. Like, the female triad is a super common problem in females who train too hard over time. Is that a health consequence that you're willing to accept with where you're hoping to take your competitive future in the sport? I don't think a lot of people have the context to be able to make that decision, but our goal with having conversations like this and offering alternatives is to try and provide positive options for them, positive alternatives, so that they have something else that they can lean into and say, maybe this is going to be best suited for my long-term physical, mental, emotional health over time.
Yeah. And to just maybe give a personal, just so that we can get out of the depth of this Pandora's box, I'll offer a personal narrative. I've had like body image issues for a long time, a huge portion of my life, and related to cutting weight, childhood incidences, like being chubby as a little kid. And so I went down the rabbit hole of trying to perfect my aesthetics for years. And the best that I ever got from an objective standpoint, looking at myself, was very low intensity walking, very low volume strength training. Those two things focus on my nutrition. When I was doing double sessions of CrossFit, like in order to tolerate that volume at my size and my body weight, my body just wants to eat. Like it wants calories to fuel that. And you need a lot of carbohydrates. For whatever reason, the way my body is set up, if I put carbohydrates in, my love handles start filling up. Like it's how I work. And so for me to optimize my nutrition and my fueling relative to CrossFit, I actually make a worse body composition. Whereas other athletes train, they pound carbohydrates, and then they lean out and put on muscle. Like, so those are the optimal CrossFitters. Those are the people who have the internal physiologies that are going to optimize aesthetically when they do that training. Right. For almost anybody that's not a professional athlete, I would say more strength training, more lower stress aerobic activities, and less intensity. Let's say like 1 or 2 intense bouts a week is almost always going to yield a better aesthetic, because it's not just body. It's not just how lean you are. It's also like how your skin is and your energy levels. Like attraction is so much more than just an image.
Yeah. But when we start talking about design fitness and why we set it up this way, it's for those reasons. Yeah. We want you to feel better. We want you to maybe look better. We want you to, when you get to the other areas of your life that are rising in importance to you, that you're able to be there and be present and be the best version of yourself. To chase a competitor model when you don't really belong there, it sacrifices your ability to do all of that.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't say don't be a competitor, because I feel like I love competition and I love what being an athlete.
You love losing to me every time that we compete in something, unless it's a
end this video. I'm done talking to him.
No, I think it's an important point though. Like, just because we're saying over and over, like, you shouldn't force yourself into a competitor mind state or model of training, it's not to say that you don't like a challenge. Yeah. It's not to say that you don't enjoy places inside of your training where you can still race the person next to you, because we do think that's important. Yeah. And taking a risk with your training sometimes, putting yourself out there, seeing what happens when you lose and being okay with it. Those are still going to be options inside of design fitness, because we think that has a lot of value.
And if you are a competitor, then compete well and take care of yourself and do it to the nth degree. But the problem exists when you don't have that clear boundary to separate competitor training and competitive person training, right? Like they're just different things.
Yeah. It's a slight mismatch, but I think that maybe this conversation can help to people to set their own expectations with what they're trying to look for. What is it that you actually want out of a program? Yeah. So design fitness, how do we try and solve some of those problems? I think one of the big ones when we talk about intensity is we wanted to have a program that brought more balance to the week, that brought a more natural rhythm to the week. So picturing it and comparing it to CrossFit. And again, we're not going to do much shit talking on CrossFit, but there's a lot of short, high bursts of intensity, heavy lifting. You're usually going to be walking out of the gym feeling pretty beat down, feeling like you gave it your all, which for a lot of people brings a sense of accomplishment. But what we've noticed with that for people who don't necessarily have the ability to adapt positively to it is it impacts their ability to have sustainability over time. Yeah. So more of a balanced weekly routine where it's hard day, easy day, moderate day, hard day, easy day. That is going to lend them more to being able to stay consistent with everything. And that's our goal. Yeah. If we're just having somebody who has all these other areas of their life that they're trying to protect, physical performance or fitness can still be up pretty high, but not at the cost of these other ones. And that's what we want. We want this to still be respected and valued, but not pulling away from other aspects. So the balance to the weekly routine, I think, is one thing inside of design fitness that we're going to do a very, we're going to stay more sensitive to it than other competitor-based training.
Yeah, and seeing things that are a little bit less oriented towards for time or AMRAPs or maximal loads, where there are more auto-regulated EMOMs, like 30 seconds max rep strict pull-ups is very different than like 30 seconds max rep burpee box jump overs or something like that, where you're still kind of striving to get the most out of your body, but you're doing it in a movement pattern and in a I was going to say power profile, but just the force per contraction of those is so specific to a regional area that it's not going to, it's much less likely to overload the system in a negative intensity way, where we talked about, like, one of the issues we talked about was too much intensity too frequently. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've seen from people that do that is a complete undermining of people's hormonal profiles, depressed testosterone levels, females losing their menstrual cycles, adrenal fatigue as being a very, very common thing with people that become obsessive over like the competitive side of CrossFit without taking care of lifestyle parameters. So what you have with this program is something that's just much more on the conservative end of that. It doesn't mean it's not hard. It just means we're not trying to get close to spilling you over for the last 5 degrees of performance.
When we write this, we're writing this for a person who's probably less willing to deal with the potential compromises. We're not saying that, hey, if you do CrossFit, you're setting yourself up for failure, because we don't know everything that goes into your physiology. We don't know your ability to recover and adapt. We do know that not everybody can do that. And so it was on us to say, hey, we need to be able to try and serve that person a little bit better, because we know, you and I, it's important to us to still be able to strive to challenge ourselves physically, but I don't give a shit if my squat snatch doesn't get any better. I don't give a shit about having 150 chest to bars inside of 10 minutes. But I do care about, you know, being able to step up to the plate when a physical challenge arises in my daily life. I want to be ready for that. So for me too, I feel like I'm kind of straddling those two, because I do think I'm still planning on doing the open, and I still will try to take a competitor-based mindset into each one of those workouts. But right now, for example, my training looks a lot more like what you see in Design Fitness. I'm doing strict gymnastics training. I'm only doing singles. I'm training 4 days a week. I have more EMOMs. I rest a full recovery between things, because I'm trying to rebuild myself. I'm trying to get out of a state of burnout, which I did to myself, not just through what I was doing training wise, but just like my whole lifestyle over the course of COVID and the games and personal issues and all of that stuff led to me being in that state. So it also could be almost like a temporary retreat center to get yourself healthy, to go back to competitor mode. Instead of just completely like disconnecting from everything, like, hey, I'm not going to work out for a month, which I mean, sounds really appealing sometimes, but I also think that it could be detrimental in the long term. There's just there's too many positive benefits to getting yourself moving on a daily basis. And so our goal with fitness, how can we remove as many of those obstacles as possible? So we talked about the balance of intensity. We talked a little bit about time management, about how inside of the program, we wanted to make sure that you have a general structure to follow. You're keeping yourself accountable. Chances are, if you follow everything, you're in and out in 60 minutes. That's it. You can protect that window in your day. If you're telling me that physical fitness is important to you, you can protect 60 minutes.
You can make an hour.
You can make it happen. So that's what we wanted to do with this. I also think that we talked a little bit more about the ability to still challenge yourself. So in Design Fitness, one of the things that we're going to do on a monthly basis is we're going to have monthly challenges. We're going to have an initial test on the first day of that cycle, which
for cycle 1, what did you choose?
It's the burpee bonanza that Chris loves. I think if Chris was programming the CrossFit Games, this would be workout 1 or the last workout.
No, it would be
last workout of the weekend.
The finale.
He just wants to watch people race. So the initial challenge for cycle 1 is burpee bonanza. It's 7-minute AMRAP bar facing burpees. So why did we choose that? There's value to doing something that you fucking hate, right? Now, there's another reason behind this in terms of everybody, if they want to, can do a burpee. And we removed a lot of the limitations that go in the sport that might make it confounding or confusing or like too specific. Get down to the ground, get up over the bar, turn around, do it again. Do it that as many times as you can inside of 7 minutes. No standards on jumping. Get your chest to the ground.
Do whatever you want to do, but just set a baseline for yourself.
Anybody can do that.
You could be
my 5-year-old can do that. My 8-year-old can do that. I can do that. My dad can do that. This is universally accessible. It's a test that's not necessarily going to be a bunch of fun, but it's measurable, it's quantifiable, and you can prove to yourself over the course of the month that you got fitter in that, one little test. Right?
It's ironic that we talked about the damage of too much intensity, but then we're leading with a test that can be quite intense. And that's because intensity still is a good training adaptation. Challenging yourself physically is still important. It's just, how much do you do that? And what's the method that you choose to do it with?
How much do you do it? How often do you do it? How well do you prepare yourself before an intense day to be able to bring quality when it matters, right? So inside of the program, there's going to be a couple of days over the course of the week where we work on bar facing burpees because we want to improve it. If I have you do those in a sprint based format or a volume accumulation format, I make sure that the day before you didn't do a lot of pressing work or joint work specifically for your wrists or your elbows. After you're done with your burpee volume, we're doing accessory work for your posterior shoulder, for your triceps, for your biceps. Open yourself back up again. Keep an eye on movement quality and sustainability over time, but it's also about, hey, like, we're going to train for this test. There's going to be a challenge built into this program. So don't come into this thinking like, hey, this is just going to be a walk in the park.
We actually, I feel like we didn't talk about it, but joint management and joint pain and joint overuse were one of the
yeah, we talked a little bit about, you know, this idea of hormonal dysregulation that goes in with intense training and the impact that could have on joint pain. I think where you're going with that is this idea of still making sure that you're building enough movement variance into the program to protect joint health over time. Is that where you were going?
Yeah, and also taking out some of the movements that, like, there's stuff in the sport. Like, this is where I find, like, there's some contention points with CrossFit, because CrossFit, in a lot of ways, has gotten its movement and its following from the competitive side of things. Sure. So measurable fitness and high power and work being done, more work being done over time. So like kipping pull-ups, for example, have become a major part of the sport. Full squat snatches for time, or max squat snatches for time. These movements require an enormous amount of elastic strength and end range capabilities that most people don't have. Even if you're aspiring to be a competitor, a lot of people need a lot of baseline developmental movement work to be able to develop those positions so that they could express that.
Yeah.
So writing a program where it's like, you know, ton of squat snatches and a ton of muscle ups is, for most people, is almost like, we're guaranteeing we're going to fuck your shoulders up here. So we've almost removed a lot of those barriers to entry for people. Like, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get fit. It just means you don't need to use those tools specifically to govern your fitness training.
Right. Somebody else might be more willing to accept the compromise to their joint health over time because they care a little bit more about their sport performance at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We're going to say that the person who's inside of Design Fitness that we're writing it for is less willing to accept that compromise. So we're going to try and meet them where they're at with this program right up.
Yeah.
So joint health. The other thing where I was going with that movement variance wise is we will have dedicated sessions to just improving your movement quality. And this is getting you working on locomotion, working on squat routines, taking you through varied positions. Not like you're going to be doing a yoga session every day, but there's value to just exploring how your body can move.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast that was a group of scientists. They were talking about childhood development. It was related to COVID, but that has nothing to do with this. What triggered in my mind that was super interesting to me, that the brain, from their perspective, and I'm paraphrasing, so I'm sure I'll fuck this up, but is a tool to express motion.
Yeah.
And the way you express motion in space actually ties directly to the way that you think and IQ and your actual mental capability. So if you are somebody that trains only in linear patterns, then
does that constrain how you think?
Yes, maybe. I mean, that's where I was going. So us just teaching people, being like, hey, we don't know, but it's possible that us putting in these varied, weird movements that you've never seen that are kind of a combination of martial arts and dance and like stupid rolling around things that you see kids doing, that when you get old, you're like, that's stupid, I don't want to do it, actually could make you a smarter human being over time.
It's crazy to think about, and I'm going to try not to talk too much about it because I just read that book for the book club, How the Body Knows Its Mind, and they basically talk about that. Like, why do we have a brain? It's to explore our environment around us. There's organisms that have a brain, and then they'll go and latch onto something, and then they'll literally just shed their brain because they don't have to move anymore for the rest of their lives. So you're talking about like low-level sea urchins, and it's like, well, wait, why do we keep our brain? It has another purpose to it, but it's mostly movement-based.
Yeah, so there will be some, I mean, obviously to help with joint expression, but just overall health and respiratory function and spinal mobility, like things that we can do now. I do those things in the design, right? Like I do those things with individual trainees. But if you talk about the total volume of training, you're talking about like 30 minutes of the 15 hours a week dedicated to that versus a 1 hour dedicated session. That's just that. Like, hey, we're just going to teach you how to move better and do things that you've never done before.
It sounds super hippie, but the quality of that session inside of that program just can't be overstated.
Yeah.
So I think, do you want to talk about the cycle itself?
Yeah. We kind of started
the other main thing that we wanted to talk about with potential obstacles that we're trying to remove compared to another program. So one was time management. One was management of training intensity and volume over time. Another one was equipment access. Like, we know in these times, there's going to be people who might have time constraints. They might have intensity constraints. Almost everybody has come up against, I just don't have the equipment necessary. So inside of all of this is going to be a built-in path for somebody who has low equipment options. We're going to have some prerequisites just to make sure that there's enough variance inside of the program. For those who don't have any equipment, there's still the TTT at home option. That was just one more constraint that we had talked about that it wasn't mentioned here specifically.
Yeah, so that's basically like the main program assumes that you have gym equipment, gym access for a barbell, rower, dumbbells, basically the stuff you would see in a well-equipped home gym, a Globo gym, or a CrossFit open gym setting, or a Sweet Garage gym. If you don't have that, then what are the limitations? The next path is basically the low equipment path.
It's basically like you have a dumbbell, you have a jump rope, you might have some stretchy bands, and you have some space to work with.
Cool.
So we try to make sure that, if there's anybody out there who has potential obstacles for them to be able to get physical training in their day, let's do the best we can to help them with this program.
So if you lost your tribe or you can't, can work out at your gym, but you still want to maintain fitness, this can be a way to do it remotely that is a little bit more suited towards the well-rounded philosophies of CrossFit that just don't wrap into the sport.
Yep. So the cycle itself, I think the big focus for this one is just what we said before, making sure that there's a balance laid out over the course of the week. You're not touching intense days on back-to-back sessions. There's regular focuses on movement quality work, just taking your time and going through different positions and exploring them. I actually built in diaphragmatic guided breathing sessions in there to try and teach people to just, hey, get inside of yourself a little bit more. Stop worrying about everything else, getting distracted. Just spend some time getting to know yourself, letting your mind be quiet for a little bit. I think that has a lot of value. Yeah. There's also hard days. There's a squat-based progression in here that I've followed myself that I know that I want to be squatting at least once a week, if not twice a week. It's my hips, my knees, my ankles, they feel better when I squat, but they also only feel better if I prepare myself adequately ahead of time. So there's a squat-based progression here where I'll take you through a warm-up. You'll do some sort of weight progression over the course of the 4 weeks. Yeah. I just think it's important to have touches on that over time. And then obviously the retest with the monthly challenge, we're going to be doing percent pacing based progressions off of whatever your initial score was. So say that you got 114 reps over the course of 7 minutes. Like we're going to take that average rep count per minute and then try and build a pace model over that so you can hit progressions that are appropriate for you.
Cool. So as you're talking about this, I know Chris told me not to go too deep in the weeds on like nerding out on the positive benefits of health. But when you look at what training does and what you're trying to do to maintain longevity is maintain good joint quality, muscle mass and bone density to avoid fall risk and all that stuff when you get older, healthier cardiac and respiratory system, which obviously right now with the respiratory epidemic or a respiratory disease epidemic has proven that people that are more fit are more likely to be able to withstand a virus like that. So you have, and then like neurological and movement quality and IQ, kind of like what we talked about before. Sure. So there's all of these conceptual frameworks that drive the program and drive health as a secondary outcome of driving fitness, which don't take on some of the risks of performance-based training, which can kind of teeter that where you've become too focused on performance that you let go of some of the underlying health qualities.
Yeah, so what we try to do is we try to set aside what those health qualities might look like and how they might be expressed or trained in this environment. So like you said, if we were laying those out in buckets, it's, hey, load the body sometimes, get it underweight so you can improve things like muscle mass and bone density, stress the respiratory system, have them breathe for 20 minutes, have them breathe really fast for 30 seconds and then rest and recover. Move them through different positions. Don't overload just a bilateral plane movement over and over and over and over again. Have them explore things over time. And then the other side of that, I think, is finding some way to get them engaged in the program, which means challenging them. That's why we have the retest. It's making sure that there's something mentally I'm getting better at this. I'm holding this pace that I wasn't holding before. I can't wait for my retest. That's how you keep people engaged, right? Yeah. And then the other side of that is the social aspect to it, which is going to be like the platform that it's delivered on. So you can talk about like how we're going to use WattUp and
so we use WattUp to deliver the design, and it's a very cool system for inputting results, tracking results over time, so that way you can go back and you can check PRs and do all that stuff on a performance basis. For design fitness, that might be a little bit less important, but you will be able to track your performance over time. What I think provides most value is shared suffering, communal groups of training. And I know for me, I spent years of my life training by myself. And then with the creation of TTT and having an on-site group, my whole process and evolution with training has been so much more enjoyable having people to do it with, having people from all over the world send me messages about my training for the day and talk smack to me back and forth, and has made it fun. And like, I really have enjoyed that. And I think that the water cooler, which is basically like every single day there's a comment thread where you could ask us questions, get to know the other people in the group, just share how the training session was, like 7 minutes of burpees. That was my favorite thing to do, and I really enjoyed it.
You're bringing positive energy to the water cooler.
Exactly.
But no, that social reinforcement, not just holding you accountable. So you know that everybody's out there looking at your results and like making sure that you post something on a daily basis. But I think there's something really, really powerful from a human nature standpoint of being able to serve in that capacity for somebody else. So picture a CrossFit class, right? You go to your 5:30 a.m. class every day before work. You know that there's going to be that same group of people. There's going to be that coach there that's going to hold you accountable and make sure you showed up and put your score down. You are that for those other people. Getting inside of this community, we're going to encourage everybody to interact as much as possible, to serve other people and hold them accountable and make sure that you're being that positive influence on them. I think that that has a lot of potential, positive mental benefit over time, knowing that you serve a purpose that exists outside of yourself.
Yeah, and I think it serves a nice selfish internal emotional thing. It feels good to help other people, and in doing so it also holds you accountable because you're more likely to be doing the work. And it's easy to fall off. I mean, man, the society has become super convenient. Like I can get my food delivered to me all the time. I don't really have to leave. There's awesome entertainment stuff at home. Like I don't need to go to the movies anymore. So like all of this stuff is basically saying, stay home. You're going to have so much fun in this little comfort bubble.
There's a reason that the mental health numbers are rising is because we are isolating ourselves more, and it's happening more in affluent societies where you don't have to go out, where you don't have to interact with people. So what we want is, hey, even though this is going to be a virtual remote-based product, build connections, build relationships, and then actively nurture them over time.
So. And with people that are interested in the same things, people who are interested in keeping their bodies healthy, exploring their minds, learning new things, taking on challenges. That's really what we're trying to do, is build a community of trainees that's as strong as the design, but the design is the community of competitor trainees. Now, this is just a community of people who are competitive and interested in training, but not necessarily care about, they're not going to go to Wadapalooza. They're not going to go to a competition.
So this is going to launch the
Jan
first
4?
week of January.
Yeah, Jan 4 is the first actual training day. Sometime before that, we'll actually launch and open it up.
There's a sign up button on the website right now. If you're interested, you can put your email on the list. You can get more information about as we continue to roll this out and put the meat on it. But other than that, I think that that's a lot of the information about it.
Hopefully we see you in there for the first cycle and join us for the Burpee Bonanza.